I raised my daughter with every piece of my soul. After her father walked out when Lila was just 8 years old, it was just me and her, stitching together a life from scraps. Those early mornings still haunt me. Waking up at 4:30 a.m. to get ready for my first shift at the diner, tiptoeing around our tiny apartment so I wouldn't wake her, leaving carefully packed lunches and notes reminding her to lock the door after school. I worked double shifts at Mickey's Diner on Elm Street, my feet swollen by evening, my hands perpetually smelling of grease and burnt coffee. The other waitresses complained about the long hours, the difficult customers, the way the manager would dock our pay for broken plates. But I never complained. Every blister on my feet, every ache in my lower back, every rude comment from impatient customers. It was all worth it to keep Lila in school clothes that fit properly, to pay for those ballet lessons she loved so desperately. I can still see her at 7 years old, spinning around our cramped living room in that little pink leotard I'd bought secondhand. Her arms stretched out like she was trying to catch the whole world. "Look, Mama," she'd call out, her face radiant with pure joy. "I'm a swan." And in those moments, watching her dance among the mismatched furniture and faded carpet, I believed I was giving her everything she needed. When college application season arrived, reality hit hard. The guidance counselor sat us down in her office, surrounded by brochures for universities I'd only seen in movies, and explained the costs. Application fees, SAT prep courses, college visits. It all added up to more money than I saw in 3 months of tips. That night, I sat at our kitchen table, staring at the bills and trying to do math that wouldn't work no matter how I arranged the numbers. That's when I remembered my mother's pearl earrings, tucked away in a jewelry box I rarely opened. They were the only valuable thing I owned, the only connection I had left to my own mother, who'd worn them to church every Sunday until the day she died. Those earrings had survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and my bitter divorce. They were meant to be passed down, kept in the family, preserved for the next generation. But Lila's future mattered more than my past. I walked into Henderson's pawn shop on a Tuesday morning, my head held high despite the shame burning in my chest. The man behind the counter barely looked at me as he examined the pearls under his jeweler's loupe. "Decent quality," he said with a shrug. "I can give you 800. It wasn't nearly enough for everything Lila needed, but it was a start. I sold my mother's earrings and never once asked Lila for a thank you, never expected one either. I thought love was a seed you plant with sacrifice and devotion, nurture through sleepless nights and missed meals, and it grows back to you multiplied. I thought the years of wearing the same winter coat so she could have a new one each season, the way I'd eat crackers for dinner so she could have seconds of whatever I'd managed to cook, the times I worked through fever and exhaustion because missing a shift meant missing rent money. I thought all of that would root itself deep in her heart, create an unbreakable bond between us. But when Lila grew up, when she graduated college with a marketing degree and landed a job at a downtown firm, when she married Mark with his pressed khakis and careful smile and suburban ambitions, she didn't see a mother who had sacrificed everything. She saw a weight to shed, an embarrassment to manage, a burden she'd never asked for and didn't want to carry. At 67, when my knees started giving out from all those years standing on restaurant floors, when I missed a few bills because my Social Security barely covered the rising cost of everything, she called me a liability. The word hit me like a physical blow. Standing there in my kitchen holding the phone with trembling hands, she said I was too old, too frail, too much to handle. So she tricked me into a care facility, took my apartment, and acted like I was already gone. But I wasn't confused, I wasn't done. And while she thought I'd fade into those sterile walls, I was planning something she'd feel every time she turned her key in the lock. This is how I made my daughter regret underestimating me. It started with a fall in my kitchen on a gray November morning. I'd been dizzy for days, probably dehydrated from skipping lunch to save on groceries. The rent had gone up again, and my medication copays seemed to increase every month. I'd been rationing food, telling myself that eating less was probably healthier anyway, that I didn't need as much at my age. I was reaching for a glass from the cabinet when the world tilted sideways. My hand missed the handle, my knees buckled, and I went down hard on the linoleum floor. The impact echoed through the apartment like a gunshot, And for a moment I just lay there, stunned and ashamed. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door must have heard because she was knocking within minutes, her voice tight with concern through the thin wall we shared. The paramedics were kind but thorough, checking my vitals, asking about medications, testing my reflexes. Nothing was broken, they assured me, just bruised and shaken. But somehow, within an hour of their visit, Lila knew about the fall. I found out later that Mrs. Rodriguez had called her, worried that I was getting too frail to live alone. Lila came over that evening with Mark, both of them wearing expressions of practiced concern that I should have recognized as performance. She knelt beside my chair, taking my hands in hers with a tenderness I hadn't felt from her in years. "Mom, we just want you safe," she said, her eyes darting to Mark like they'd rehearsed this moment in their car before coming up. They offered to manage my finances, talking about my apartment like it was a burden I shouldn't carry. "These old buildings aren't safe," Mark added, his voice smooth and reasonable. "What if you'd hit your head? What if no one had heard you fall?" Their concern felt genuine in the moment. I was touched that they wanted to help, grateful that maybe this crisis would bring us closer together. I didn't know they'd already met with a realtor, toured my building, gotten an assessment of what my one-bedroom apartment would rent for in the current market. I didn't know Mark had been researching elder care facilities, making calls, setting appointments. I didn't know Lila had been telling the neighbors I was losing it, laying the groundwork for what they planned to do. Most devastating of all, I didn't know that Mark had already been transferring small amounts from my savings account to a new account I couldn't access, using a power of attorney document that bore my forged signature. They'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months, waiting for the right moment to act. They took me to dinner the following Friday evening, said it was a treat. "Let's get you out, Mom," Lila smiled, her voice sweet as syrup. "You've been cooped up since the fall, and we thought you might enjoy some nice food for a change." I dressed carefully, choosing the blue blouse she'd given me for my birthday 2 years earlier, back when she still remembered birthdays without Mark having to remind her. I even put on a little lipstick, grateful for this chance to reconnect with my daughter and son-in-law. I didn't pack a suitcase, didn't bring my reading glasses or my evening medications. This was dinner, a family evening out, a chance to feel loved and included again. The restaurant was nicer than anywhere I'd eaten in years, the kind of place with cloth napkins and fresh flowers on every table. Lila ordered wine, kept raising her glass in toasts to new beginnings and taking care of family. Mark was unusually chatty, asking about my childhood, my parents, my memories of Lila as a little girl. At the time, I thought he was finally making an effort to know me better, to understand the family he'd married into. I realize now he was building a case, gathering evidence of confusion and memory problems that existed only in his imagination. After dinner, instead of driving me home to my familiar apartment, they took a different route through parts of the city I didn't recognize. "We want to show you something," Lila said, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't identify. "There's this place we've been researching, and we think you'd really like to see it." They drove me to a building I'd never seen before, all red brick and carefully manicured lawns, with a discreet sign that read, "Sunset Manor Care Community." The lobby had gleaming linoleum floors and fake orchids arranged in expensive-looking vases, the kind of sterile cheerfulness that makes you feel sad just looking at it. "Just a short stay," Mark said, his hand gentle but firm on my elbow as he guided me through the automatic doors. "To get you back on your feet after the fall. You'll be safe here, and we'll visit all the time." They hugged me. Lila's embrace felt rehearsed, empty, like she was going through the motions, and promised they'd be back the next day to check on me. I stood in that lobby, still wearing my dinner clothes, still tasting the wine from our toasts, watching their car disappear into the night, and I knew with a certainty that cut through my confusion like a blade. The intake nurse, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, handed me a clipboard of forms to review and sign. But my name was already there, written in Lila's careful script, with boxes checked for long-term care and financial oversight. They'd committed me, signed away my freedom, locked me in this place like I was already dead to them. I was escorted to a room with no photos, no books, no personal touches at all, just a twin bed with institutional sheets, A chipped nightstand that looked like it had seen decades of other people's desperation, and a window that looked out onto a parking lot where my daughter's car was no longer visible. I sat on that narrow bed, my hands trembling, not from age but from rage. Pure, crystalline rage that burned away the confusion and disbelief, leaving behind something harder and more focused than anything I'd felt in years. The fury was clean and energizing, cutting through the fog of hurt and betrayal to show me exactly what I needed to do. The next morning, I asked to see the director. Margaret Patterson was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and tired shoulders, the kind of professional kindness that comes from years of dealing with difficult family situations. She listened patiently as I explained that there had been a mistake, that I wasn't senile, that I'd been brought here under false pretenses. "There's been a mistake," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I'm not senile. I don't have dementia. I don't belong here." She looked at me with practiced pity, the expression of someone who'd heard this story countless times before. "Mrs. Hayes," she said gently, "your daughter was very concerned when she called. She reported memory lapses and unsafe behavior. She mentioned that you'd been forgetting to pay bills, that you'd had several falls, that you seemed confused about dates and appointments. Memory lapses, unsafe behavior." The lies came so easily to Lila, wrapped in tears and delivered with trembling voice, I'm sure. I wanted to shout, to rage, to demand they call her right now and make her repeat these accusations to my face. But shouting makes you look unhinged, makes you seem exactly like the confused old woman they thought I was, and I wasn't giving them that satisfaction. Instead, I waited. I watched. I learned the rhythms of this place, the schedules and routines, the way the staff moved through their days with efficient compassion. 3 days later, I managed to get a phone call through to Lila. It went straight to voicemail. Her cheerful voice saying she was probably with a client and would get back to me as soon as possible. I tried Mark next. The call went directly to a recording saying the number was no longer in service. They'd blocked me. My own daughter had cut me off like a dead branch, discarded me like something shameful that needed to be hidden away. That night, lying in the narrow bed surrounded by the sounds of other people's nightmares and medications, I borrowed a notebook from the activities coordinator, told her I wanted to write letters to old friends. Instead, I listed everything I could remember: bank account numbers, the exact details of my lease agreement, the name and phone number of Clara Thompson, the lawyer who'd helped me through my divorce 20 years earlier. I wrote down every bill I'd paid for the past 30 years, every deposit I'd made, every sacrifice I'd carved out of my bones for Lila's benefit. They thought I wouldn't notice the missing money from my savings account. They thought I'd forget my own signature, my own legal documents, the precise terms of my lease. They were wrong about everything. Clara Thompson answered my call on the second try, her voice exactly as I remembered. Sharp, intelligent, impatient with nonsense but warm toward people she cared about. "Eleanor, is that you?" she asked, her tone immediately shifting to concern. "I heard from Barbara Henderson that you were in some kind of facility. What's going on?" "I'm in a care home," I said, keeping my voice low so the nursing staff wouldn't overhear. "Lila put me here, forged my name on documents, and took my apartment. Clara, they think I'm senile, but I'm not. They've stolen my money, my home, my freedom. I need help." There was a long pause, and I could practically hear her legal mind clicking into high gear, processing the implications of what I'd just told her. "You're not staying there," she said finally, her voice fierce with determination. "Give me 48 hours. Don't sign anything, don't agree to any new medications or treatments, and don't let them convince you that you belong there. I'm coming to get you." Those 48 hours felt like months. I watched the other residents shuffle through their daily routines, some genuinely needing the care and structure this place provided, others looking as lost and displaced as I felt. I helped where I could, reading to Mrs. Chan, whose cataracts made books impossible, listening to Mr. Rodriguez tell stories about grandchildren who never visited. I began to understand that Sunset Manor wasn't evil, just institutional, and it definitely wasn't where I belonged. Clara arrived on Thursday morning like an avenging angel in a navy suit and sensible heels. She walked into the facility with a leather briefcase full of legal documents and a glare that made the administrative staff scatter like startled birds. We sat in my small room while she spread papers across the tiny table, going over every detail of what had happened to me. The evidence was overwhelming. Copies of my lease agreement, which still listed me as the sole tenant with no indication that I wanted to terminate it. Bank statements showing unauthorized transfers from my savings account to an account I'd never opened. Most damning of all, the power of attorney document that supposedly gave them legal control over my affairs. "This signature isn't even close to yours," Clara said, holding up the fraudulent document next to a legitimate paper I'd signed in her office years earlier. "Look at this. Your real signature has that distinctive loop in the E, and you always do your eyes with little circles. This looks like someone practiced in a mirror for 10 minutes and gave up." We went through everything methodically. The story Lila had told the facility about my supposed memory problems. The financial transfers that had begun weeks before my kitchen fall. The lies she'd spread to neighbors and friends about my mental state, creating a false narrative to justify what they were planning. "You want to play hardball?" Clara asked, her eyes blazing with a righteous anger I'd been too hurt and confused to access myself. I looked at her. This woman who barely knew me anymore but was willing to fight for my dignity and freedom, and I said with complete conviction, "I want to burn their world down." We started with an emergency petition to revoke the fraudulent power of attorney. Clara brought in Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a geriatrician who specialized in competency evaluations for exactly these kinds of cases. Dr. Mitchell spent 3 hours with me, testing my memory, my reasoning ability, my capacity to manage my own financial affairs. "Mrs. Hayes," she said when we finished, shaking her head in disbelief, "you're not only mentally sound, you're sharper than most people half your age. Your recall is excellent, your judgment is intact, and there's absolutely no medical reason you can't continue living independently. Whoever suggested otherwise was either grossly mistaken or deliberately lying." Armed with Dr. Mitchell's comprehensive evaluation, we filed criminal charges for financial elder abuse against both Lila and Mark. The charges were serious: fraud, forgery, unlawful imprisonment, theft of assets from a vulnerable adult. Clara also moved to immediately freeze their access to any of my remaining accounts and demanded an emergency eviction notice for my apartment, which they'd already moved into and begun treating as their own property. I left Sunset Manor on a Tuesday morning, walking out the front door with my head held high and my few belongings in a small bag. No fanfare, no dramatic confrontation, just Clara's car waiting in the circular drive and the sweet taste of freedom on my tongue. We didn't go directly to my apartment. I wasn't ready to face what they'd done to my home, to see my furniture rearranged and my personal belongings sorted through like items at a garage sale. Instead, Clara set me up in a small furnished rental across town, a one-bedroom unit with a tiny balcony where I could sit and breathe again, where I could think clearly about what came next. The eviction notice hit them like a brick through their comfortable new window. Clara's process server, a cheerful woman named Rosa who took particular satisfaction in serving papers to people who preyed on the elderly, later told us that Lila screamed when she saw the legal documents. Mark stammered and blustered, threatened to call the police until Rosa calmly pointed out that they were the ones who had committed multiple felonies. They tried to call me after that. My phone rang constantly for 3 days. Lila's number, Mark's new number, numbers I didn't recognize that I assumed belonged to their friends or their own hastily hired lawyer. I didn't answer any of them. After what they'd done to me, after the way they'd tried to erase me from existence, I had nothing to say to them. I pictured them in my living room, surrounded by my furniture, drinking coffee from my favorite mugs, sleeping in my bed, thinking they'd successfully gotten rid of me. They'd painted over the soft yellow walls I'd loved, replaced my gentle floral curtains with stark white blinds. According to Clara's investigation, they'd thrown away boxes of my personal belongings, photo albums, letters, books I'd collected over decades, treating 40 years of my life like garbage to be cleared out. But they hadn't won. The court gave them 30 days to vacate my apartment, and I used that time to plan something that would be both perfectly legal and devastatingly effective. I sold the apartment to Dorothy Kim, a recently retired high school English teacher who wanted a quiet place to read and tend houseplants. She looked past the changes Lila and Mark had made, appreciated the apartment's good bones, the way the morning light streamed through the east-facing windows. The sale closed quickly, cash transaction, no financing complications or delays. With that money in hand, I did something that took Clara's breath away and made me smile for the first time in months. I bought a condominium in the building directly across the street from the rental apartment where Lila and Mark had been forced to relocate. Not next door, that would have constituted harassment, but close enough to see their windows clearly, close enough to be a constant shadow they couldn't ignore, a daily reminder that would greet them every morning and follow them home every evening. The first day I moved into my new place, I arranged a comfortable chair on my small balcony, made myself a glass of iced tea, and put on my favorite scarf, the blue one with silver threads that caught the afternoon light. I was sitting there, perfectly relaxed and obviously enjoying myself, when Lila walked out to her car for what was probably a routine errand. She saw me and froze like a deer caught in headlights. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the narrow street that now separated us. Then she scurried back inside so quickly she nearly tripped on the front steps, her face flushed with what I hoped was shame. Mark started taking a different route to work after that, avoiding my street entirely even though it added 15 minutes to his commute. I'd occasionally spot him at the grocery store or the bank, and he'd quickly turn down a different aisle or pretend to be deeply engrossed in his phone, his shoulders hunched with guilt. I didn't wave at them, didn't call out greetings, didn't acknowledge them at all. My simple presence was enough. My survival was the message I needed them to receive every single day. I started a small garden on my balcony, lavender and daisies, bright marigolds that attracted butterflies, trailing ivy that caught the breeze and danced in the afternoon sun. Clara, who visited every Friday for coffee and updates on the legal proceedings, called it my victory garden, called it living. Pure, simple living on my own terms in my own space, surrounded by things I'd chosen to nurture and grow. The routine suited me perfectly. Morning coffee on the balcony while I watched the city wake up, tending my plants, reading books I'd never had time for during all those years of working double shifts and raising a child. I felt lighter than I had in decades, unencumbered by the exhausting effort of trying to maintain a relationship with someone who saw me as nothing but a burden. Then one afternoon in late spring, there was a soft knock on my door. I opened it to find my grandson Ethan standing on my doorstep, looking uncertain and somehow older than his 15 years. He was all lanky limbs and quiet eyes, tall enough now to look down at me slightly. His face a mixture of his parents' features but with something gentler in his expression. "Mom said you were sick," he said, his voice careful and hesitant. "She said you were in a place for people with problems. But you don't look sick to me." I stepped aside to let him in, poured him lemonade in one of my favorite glasses, the ones with tiny painted flowers that Lila had always dismissed as old-fashioned junk, and told him the truth. All of it. The lies his parents had told, the money they'd stolen, the way they'd tried to have me declared incompetent and locked away. He listened without interrupting, his face growing harder with each revelation. When I finished, he sat quietly for a long time, staring out my window toward the building where his parents lived. "They lied to me," he said finally, his voice thick with anger and hurt. "They told me you didn't want to see me anymore, that you were confused and might say hurtful things that weren't really your fault." I nodded, my heart breaking for this boy who'd been used as a pawn in his parents' scheme. "They lied to us both, sweetheart." Ethan started coming over after school regularly, helping me with the plants, asking about his grandfather, the man who'd abandoned us both but whose absence had shaped so much of our family's story. He asked about my childhood, about Lila as a little girl, about the life his mother had never shared with him. "Their house is really tense now," he told me one day while we were repotting a spider plant that had outgrown its container. "Mom and Dad fight all the time. She cries a lot, and he sleeps in the guest room most nights. I think they blame each other for what happened to you." Good, I thought, but didn't say aloud. Let them taste the bitter fruit of their choices. One warm evening in June, almost a year after they'd had me committed, There was a hesitant knock on my door. I opened it to find Lila standing there, and for a moment, I barely recognized my own daughter. She looked worn down, hollow, her expensive clothes wrinkled and her makeup smudged. Her hands twisted a tissue into shreds as she stood there with red-rimmed eyes, looking like she hadn't slept properly in weeks. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice small and broken, nothing like the confident woman who'd engineered my imprisonment. I stood in the doorway, looking at this person who shared my blood but had become a stranger to me. I didn't invite her in. I didn't step aside. Waited. "You thought I was finished," I said, my voice calm and steady. "You took my home, my money, my freedom. You tried to erase me like I never existed." She started to cry then, real tears that tracked mascara down her cheeks. "We were trying to help," she sobbed. "We thought. We were scared something would happen to you, that you'd get hurt." I cut her off before she could finish weaving another web of self-serving justification. "You helped yourselves. You locked me away and called it love. You stole from me and called it care. You lied about me to everyone and called it concern." She had no answer for that because there was no answer that could make any of it right. The truth was simple and ugly. They'd seen an opportunity to improve their own lives at my expense, and they'd taken it without a moment's genuine concern for what it would do to me. "Ethan's welcome here any time," I said finally. "You're not." I closed the door on her tears, on her excuses, on the daughter I'd raised and lost. Through my window, I watched her walk back to her building, her shoulders shaking with sobs that I felt no sympathy for whatsoever. The money from selling my apartment had left me more financially secure than I'd been in years. After buying the condo and furnishing it comfortably, I still had a substantial sum remaining. I could have kept it all, invested it conservatively, lived comfortably on the interest while traveling or indulging in small luxuries I'd never been able to afford. Instead, I donated half of it to the Women's Legal Aid Society, specifically funding their elder advocacy program. I called it the Hayes Fund, not for personal glory or recognition, but to ensure that no other woman would be discarded and erased the way Lila and Mark had tried to erase me. The day I delivered the check, Ethan came with me to the legal aid office. His eyes went wide when he saw the amount I was donating, when he understood the impact it would have on other families facing similar situations. "You're kind of a badass, Grandma," he said, grinning at me with genuine pride and admiration. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. "I'm just done being quiet, sweetheart." Lila and Mark split up a month after her pathetic attempt to reconcile with me. I heard about it through Ethan, who had chosen to spend most of his time at my place rather than in the toxic atmosphere his parents had created. The divorce was bitter and public, with accusations flying about the money they'd stolen from me, about who had been the mastermind behind their elaborate scheme. Mark had been the strategist, it turned out, but Lila had been an enthusiastic participant. She'd been the one who convinced the care facility staff that I was incompetent, who'd spread lies about my mental state to neighbors and friends. They'd both been equally guilty, and now they were both paying the appropriate price. Lila moved to Phoenix, chasing a marketing position she probably didn't even need, desperate to put distance between herself and the consequences of her actions. The geographical separation was good for all of us. It removed the daily reminder of what she'd done and gave her space to figure out who she wanted to be without Mark's influence. Mark lost his lease on their rental apartment when it became clear he'd been using my stolen money to cover his half of the rent. He moved in with his brother in a different part of the city, his credit destroyed by legal fees and the financial judgment against him. I saw him once at the grocery store months later, looking older and somehow smaller. He started to raise his hand in greeting when he spotted me, then thought better of it and hurried away down a different aisle. The condo across the street eventually was rented to a young couple with a toddler. I enjoyed watching them in the evenings, the way they took turns chasing their little boy around the courtyard, the way they sat together on their small balcony after he was asleep. It reminded me of better times, of the family I'd thought I was building with Lila all those years ago. Ethan lives with me now, his room filled with books and art supplies, a small desk where he works on drawings that show real talent. I'm teaching him to cook simple, nutritious meals, to tend plants with patience, to listen more than he speaks. He's teaching me about technology and social media, showing me pictures of his friends and their adventures, helping me stay connected to a world that's changing faster than I can sometimes follow. The Hayes Fund has helped dozens of women in its first 2 years of operation. Some of them send me letters, telling me about their lives after their legal battles were won, about grandchildren they get to see again, about apartments they were able to keep, about dignity they managed to reclaim. Clara says I should be proud of what I've built, but pride isn't quite the right word for what I feel. Feels more like completion, like I've finally figured out what my life was supposed to be about all along. Every morning, I sit on my balcony with my coffee and watch the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. My garden has expanded over the past 2 years. Tomatoes and herbs, morning glories that climb the railings in a riot of purple and blue, a small lemon tree that surprises me with fragrant blossoms each spring. The condo across the street is occupied by different people now, but my balcony remains alive with flowers and possibilities. I didn't just survive what Lila and Mark did to me. I rewrote my entire story, transformed their betrayal into something meaningful and lasting. They called me a burden, but I became their mirror, reflecting every choice they made back at them until they couldn't escape the truth of what they'd done. And in that reflection, in the clear, unforgiving light of consequences, I found something I'd lost years before: peace. Not the peace of resignation or defeat, but the peace that comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to let anyone else define your worth. The peace of sitting in your own space, surrounded by things you've chosen to grow and nurture, with people who see you as you really are. They thought they were writing my ending. Instead, they gave me the opportunity to write my own beginning. And that's my story: how I turned betrayal into strength and found peace in a life I reclaimed. They thought they could erase me, but I built something stronger. A legacy of truth, love, and second chances. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button to join our community. Share your own stories of resilience in the comments below. And let's keep shining a light on those who refuse to be silenced. Click the bell to stay updated for more stories of triumph. And I'll see you in the next one. Because no one gets to write your ending but you.